That was confusing.
Chris, can you hear us right now?
Yes.
Helping us.
Would you rather get it from shot or have it with yeah. Okay, that's I know, I hate it too. You're little my like
That exists.
I know. Don't think about it. Don't think about it. I was like stressed.
Oh, nice. I wanted to, but I have this.
Yes. That's what I'm talking about.
You can actually open both of those a little bit more and we can do natural lighting in here, I think. I think that'll work well if you
I'll
just
take that.
a little bit further. Chris, can you hear us here? You're on mute right now. I just want to make sure our room microphone is working okay.
I can hear you, John. Can you hear me?
What is it like if I do it all the way up?
I cannot hear you.
Right, guys?
Let's see.
Yeah, I'll do there.
Turn this up.
Oh, look at the cactus.
Chris, are you talking? Because I can
No, I didn't get it.
Can you hear
cannot
me now?
you. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
I can't see you either, of course. Maddie,
No. What's wrong with your bike?
Oh, come by the
Wait, your
mic.
tire's deflated. You can just
Kirsten.
pump it up. No.
can you hear us okay?
You just need to get a new one. Talk to Max.
I know, I didn't.
Can you unmute and say something? I just want to see if we got, can you guys quiet down for a sec? Can I just want to make sure we're hearing you okay?
Sounds good. Hi, I'm Kirsten.
I'm
I'm
not
Logan.
getting you. Let's see. What is that? Let me just try changing my mic. All right, can one of you say something again? Let's see if I got you now.
Sure. Hi, it's Kirsten from Great Lakes Science Center.
Check here. Let's see, speaker.
Testing.
Speaker system. If you guys can just keep on chatting a little bit and we'll see if we get you on as you do that.
Okay, you're asking us on screen to keep chatting so that you can test the sound.
Let's see, try testing speaker.
Okay.
microphone. Okay, now if you guys could speak.
Hello.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah, we got you. Kirsten?
Great. Yeah. Hi, it's Kirsten.
Okay, it looks like I've got two mics on because I'm hearing my.
Audio is working now?
Yeah, I think it's because you've got your computer and then it's also playing from the
Smart
big
board.
screen.
Test 1, 2. Can you?
We can hear you.
Test 1, 2. And that is repeating itself. I don't want to do
Wait,
that.
try just pressing yes or X.
Test 1, 2. Can you guys hear me?
I can.
Yes.
Yeah,
I can hear
absolutely.
you.
We can hear you.
We've resolved our issues. Well, thanks so much for agreeing to participate in our class today. I'm going to say just a tiny bit about the class for those of you who are on remotely. Neeraj has participated before, so he's familiar with this, with the class. But for and Kirsten, I actually think you did participate many years ago, if I recall correctly. It's just been a while, but Chris is not. So you guys are zooming into a practicum in environmental communications class. So the students in this class you can kind of see in a circle here, are focused on learning about communication skills that are specifically related to communicating about the environment, and more specifically with a goal of communicating in a way that promotes pro-environmental thought and behavior. So that's the class goal. They do that in this class by engaging in a variety of different projects that in one way or another advance our dashboard projects in the city of Oberlin, in various school systems we work in our Great Lakes Science Center Cleveland dashboard, and in the Midtown Community dashboard. So they're all engaged in various projects on that. It's intended to be a practicum, which is that they learn from their experiences and learn from our collaborators. And so today, we're kind of focusing on getting them more up to speed on some of the collaborations we've been engaged in Cleveland. The Cleveland Environmental Dashboard exhibit at Great Lakes Science Center and the Midtown Community Dashboard. So in preparation for today's discussion, they've read a couple of the grant proposals, which have secured funding for doing this. They've reviewed content on both the Cleveland Environmental Dashboard exhibit and from Midtown. They've come, I think, with some questions. Now, so that students understand, and I did communicate this before, I did not ask any of our guests today to give any particular presentation. And so the conversation we have for the next 30 minutes or so here is really going to be based on questions. I did ask our guests to prepare to say a little bit about their roles within their organizations, their perceptions of the value that their organizations are getting out of their collaboration on Dashboard, past and potentially also in the future. And I also asked them to say a little bit about their career trajectories, how they got to be where they are right now in their careers, because obviously students in this class are thinking very hard about what they might do with their career. Some of them are thinking very hard about how communications might fit into their career. So hearing a little bit more about how you got where you got and where communications and education fit into that would be most helpful to our group today. Now, there's Maddie, do you have a screen you can turn on, or are you limited in capacity to do that?
Yes, no, I will turn that on momentarily. Just
So
switching out.
I invited Maddie, who is a collaborator who's been working full-time on all of the dashboard projects for several years now. She was once a student in this class many years ago and has gone on to sort of, her career now focuses on building out dashboard content everywhere. And so I invited Maddie in too, because Maddie's played a real principal role in developing a lot of the content that we're using in Cleveland. So I don't know where or who we want to start with, but does one of you want to go first in this discussion? You go, Kirsten. Thank you. You're muted right now, though.
There we go. Hi, I'm Kirsten Ellenbogen. I'm president and CEO of Great Lakes Science Center here in Cleveland, Ohio, right on Lake Erie. Hopefully you've all been here, but if not, we will work to get you out here. I'll also talk a little bit from my perspective. My background is more in science communication. My background is more in science education, but I've done an increasing amount of work in science communication over the years. And I chair the National Academies of Sciences Committee on Advancing Science Communication. So if you're not using that as a resource, if you're familiar with the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, you can go to that website, just type in National Academies of Science and type in Science Communication Committee. That should pop right up. You'll see there's a lot of resources that faculty from all over the country have produced over the years. And there are books that you can download published by the National Academies, for example, on advancing science communication. So a lot of resources there if you have not used them, but certainly I wear that hat as well because I spent a ton of time managing this national group. I co-chair that committee that's really working. We produce reports for Congress We do consensus reports where we're gathering faculty from around the country, those kinds of things. So how do we get involved in this? Do you want me to start with that, or what
Sure,
would be the best place to start?
sure.
Sure. Okay. So I think it came out of an early conversation, just in terms of what's going on at the Science Center, the work going on at Oberlin, and the excitement that we had some interconnections, because as we're increasingly looking at what are the skills we're trying to develop for families and children for the future, huge amount of that really coalesces around understanding of data. So for example, we have a program for 8th graders. It's for all 8th graders in Cleveland Metro School District. Every classroom in the district participates. And, we were asked to focus on emerging tech. Well, the more we prototype that concept, the more we found that if you want to talk about Internet of Things, you really have to be able to wrap your head around like, what's a variable, right? Do you understand what data is? So we started out even creating card games and things around that to just help students understand the concept of what's data, what's a variable. And that's ended up being a theme in a number of our projects, right? As we're looking towards future skills that we're trying to help people develop, get interested in, and develop an identity around, right? So you'll hear in the Science Center world, we talk a lot about interest and we talk about identity. Again, if you're familiar with some of the big publications around informal science education, there are there's lots of learning that intersects really well with what happens in a classroom. But two of the really unique features that happen for science centers and other kinds of museums is that turns out we're really one of the best learning environments you can have in developing interest. And we're really one of the best learning environments you can have in developing an identity. An identity, when you think about careers, if you're familiar with Bob Tye's research, other areas like that, having a student around the age of 11, 12, 13, be interested and say like, hey, I could see myself doing this. I could see myself going into computer science. I could see myself being an engineer. I'm interested in that career. That is more predictive of whether or not they're going to end up in a STEM career than pretty much any other factor in these longitudinal studies. It's more predictive than household income, more predictive than whether or not they took algebra in 8th grade, which we know is critical, right? It's more predictive than what their parents' careers were, where they go to college. I mean, it's shockingly predictive that interest and identity when the child is around those middle school ages is critical. So we spend a lot of time focusing on that in my world, in the informal science world. And we are thinking a great deal around the data piece and understanding that so many things in the future, you got to understand the concept of data and a variable. So when we started to talk about environmental science, which again, we're not the Natural History Museum, our buddies up the road do a ton on environmental science. We're not Shaker Lakes Nature Center or Lake Erie Nature Center or the zoo or the aquarium. We're not trying to overlap with that content. When we do environmental science, we're doing usually the tech or the data side of it. So to have a project come forward saying like, hey, we're working on the data science of this, right? That actually was finally a connection. Because let me tell you, we get a lot of phone calls from people who are working on random environmental science projects where I say, I'm happy to introduce you to somebody, but that's a better fit at the zoo or it's a better fit at Natural History Museum. I'll do an introduction. So this for us has been a very important way of showing that bringing in the data side of environmental science is critical. It's a good fit for Great Lakes Science Center, and that it's something that we can build off. And Chris will talk more about where we're trying to head with that with our current strategic plan. But certainly, from my perspective on why does an organization like Great Lakes Science Center get involved in something like the dashboard? That's really what drove that.
If you could just say one word about just didn't fully introduce, she's CEO and president of the Great Lakes Science Center. So how did you get where you are right now? If you could just say a word quickly about
Sure.
how you got there.
Sure. So I worked first in pathology and then in neuroimmunology. Both were exceptionally depressing in terms of the field of work, particularly the neuroimmunology work I was doing was with multiple, we were in a hospital attached to a multiple sclerosis clinic. So we were doing the research side. I wasn't seeing patients, but tough work, certainly in terms of the emotional side of that work. And because it was an academic lab, I was able to take summers off and go work at a science museum. And I did it at the Field Museum and Museum of Science and Industry. And I got to a point where I thought, maybe I just want to do this all the time. It's definitely was a work your way up. Look, I've been a demonstrator back in high school at the Detroit Science Center. I started out in exhibits at Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, worked into education, and this is great as, we had an email address, but we didn't have the World Wide Web. So I was struggling with exhibit work where, I'd be trying to create an exhibit on imaging tools, and we were trying to explain the difference between a coronal and a sagittal slice in an MRI and how those corresponded to the actual physical brain and what that meant, and getting the public to wrap their heads around things they couldn't necessarily manipulate. And I kept looking for, well, what's the research on that? Like, how do you help the public make a connection between a 3D object and a 2D object? Someone's done research on this, right? And I'm looking around and again, like in those days, physically picking up the phone and calling people and asking. And I got increasingly interested in the research side of this. Like, surely we must know how the public learns. Like another big one I started doing research on early, when you use white in a heat map, is white hot or is it cold, right? And surely there's research on what's the initial public impression of that. How do people learn around heat maps? And how do you design a better heat map from that? So the more people I talked to, the more I realized there was a lot of research still to be done. I did my doctorate focusing on how families learn in science centers, managed departments of evaluation and research. From there, managed departments of education and exhibits. And the big conversation that made me go, oh, it could be worth it being a CEO was when my current CEO at that time said to me, what do you want to get out of the field? Like, what do you want to say? Like, I've worked in this field my whole life. Here's the outcome. And I said, well, I really want people to be able to articulate like what counts as learning and include museums, that science centers are a legitimate part of the learning ecosystem. And he said, you're going to have a lot more power to do things like that, change that language, change the position of an organization if you're in charge of it. I will do a shout out. Serving on boards to get this kind of job is critical. I served on a lot of boards on the finance side to get a lot of financial experience. And it helps you learn a lot about how a nonprofit works before you get a job in that nonprofit. And there are boards that would love having college students and grad students on. So your skills are very valuable for nonprofit boards, and it is a great entry point to get a job, right? Because you're working an unpaid job on the board. It is a great stepping stone to get a paid position in a science center or science museum.
Well, that's some great advice. We'll turn over to I think Chris would be the logical next person here, but I just want to mention something that I've shared with my students that I'm sure you're more familiar with than I am, Kirsten, and that is that there have been several recent studies in the last few years that demonstrate that science museums, next to friends and family, are the most trusted sources of information. And so for me, in a time when somehow scientific knowledge has become politically polarized, in ways that I don't think any of us would have expected, sort of basic factual information about how the biophysical system works is questioned by people. It just seems to me, as someone who's interested in getting a message out, that there is no better place to be trying to communicate valid scientific understandings about the way things like climate change, eutrophication of the Great Lakes works than Great Lakes Science Center or any science museum. So yeah, it's certainly an impactful position you have. Chris, we'll turn over to you. Yep.
And I had one more thing just
Yeah.
on the career path. If you have not heard of the Civic Science Fellows and that fellowship opportunity that the Rita Allen Foundation offers, just Google Civic Science and like Rita Allen, RITAALLEN. Fellowships, resources, people for boundary crossers like yourselves that have a foot in the sciences and a foot in science communication. There's a lot of growth around the civic science area, and it's a great career outlet.
Thank you. Chris.
All right. My name is Chris Martin. I'm the exhibit technology developer here at the Great Lakes Science Center. I'm here sort of from the intersection of informal hands-on education, art, and science. So I started at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, where I was working on basically taking emerging technologies and integrating those with art and design. So working with immersive technology, artificial intelligence, VR, AR, creative coding, probably most relevant today, data visualization. So taking science and emerging technology and then sort of viewing it from an art perspective. After that, I was working at makerspaces, taking what I learned, working in the intersection of science and art from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and bringing it to more informal education spaces, like working with students directly, working with schools, helping them create hands-on educational experiences. I worked there for a few years at different makerspaces, helping schools create their own makerspaces. And then I wound up here at the Science Center, where I can take a lot of what I've learned about informal education, hands-on education, communicating science concepts, and bringing it to exhibit design at the Science Center. Yeah, is there anything I should bring up, John, that I'm missing?
Maybe, to be fair to Chris, he's relatively new to the Great Lakes Science Center and to the dashboard exhibit. So I don't want to put him too much on the spot. But I guess, the other question I'd ask, which is for you, what is it that the dashboard exhibit contributes? And also, especially in light of your own interests, where do you see it going in the future in ways that could really augment and help the larger vision of Great Lakes Science Center?
Sure. I mean, communicating data to the public is a big challenge. Communicating data in a way that's intuitive, easy to understand, engaging, draws visitors in. It's a big challenge. I think I've been really impressed with how the dashboard has drawn visitors in. It is something that I see people flock to. And then once you have a visitor engaging with the dashboard, then they're learning about a lot of important environmental science concepts, especially since that data is all very local to our visitors. So I think it's just an example of a really successful way to do communicate data to visitors.
Well, I'll just say along the lines of things we've talked about, I'm really excited about our conversation about figuring out ways of making that, using the back-end technology to make that data more accessible in the context of hackathons and sort of creative work that
Right.
workshops and stuff in the Great Lakes Science Center might host.
That is something that I'm super excited about. Something that John and I in our back and forth conversations have talked about is making all of this data more accessible to hackathons and early stage programmers, students that are interested in data visualization, by creating a sort of aggregated and then standardized API to present those data streams, so that you could teach these new programmers one sort of API interface and then have them explore multiple data sets through that interface. It's sort of a techie conversation, but I think if done correctly, it would really democratize this data to more people, and we would get more perspectives on how to present this information by making it more accessible.
Thanks. Shifting gears quite a bit, I want to introduce Neeraj Nayak, who's our partner, our principal contact at Midtown Cleveland, Inc., which, as you guys know, is a community development corporation that is working to help redevelop the Midtown neighborhood in Cleveland in positive ways. So Neeraj, you're on.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Neeraj Nayak. I'm a planning manager at Midtown Cleveland. I'll talk a little bit about what a community development corporation is, but I graduated from Emory in Atlanta about 4 years ago. There I did a lot of student journalism, and after that I worked on the Biden campaign as an organizer before eventually starting a fellowship that basically placed me here at Midtown. Midtown is a community development corporation. What that means is we're really a nonprofit that serves one neighborhood in Cleveland. Midtown is really at the intersection of a few different communities, a traditionally white business district, two historically Black communities, Huff and Central, as well as a historic and growing Asiatown community in the Northwest. So I tell people we are in between downtown and University Circle. There are a few things in between downtown and University Circle, but we are one of them. We really are focused on community and economic development. So on a day-to-day basis, that means supporting residents with anything that they might need, whether that's connecting them to the right resource or helping them figure something out with the city, or providing emergency assistance, or just providing them with information. On a larger scale, we are helping to create investments in the community that will catalyze it. So, things like affordable housing development, or major placemaking initiatives to calm street intersections, or just reimagining places so that they're easier to work, live, and grow in. One of our key challenges is what we call changing the narrative. Really thinking about how most people, when they think about a neighborhood like Midtown, have a lot of really pernicious ideas of what a community like this is. And there's a lot of room to really change how they think about the momentum here, how it can change for the better, and really like the long history of really exciting things that have happened here in the past. So we produced like a neighborhood vision plan about 4 years ago, and it has like 20 priorities. Some of them are, things like elevating Black and Asian creative voices or reducing housing stress. But others are more focused on sustainability, like creating green infrastructure, restoring tree canopy in Midtown, and helping to like reduce barriers, or helping to address like social determinants of health and some of those like environmental stress factors that disproportionately affect our community members. And that's really where I think is the Midtown Community Dashboard. It makes sense to introduce that project. It's, I think, at its most basic, a jobs board and community calendar. with screens strategically placed throughout the community at a family center, in one of our affordable housing complexes, and then in our main grocery store. And I think one of the most beautiful things about it is that it is really hitting a lot of our strategic priorities related to environmental communication and not, but also like becoming a platform that kind of we independently can control and make sure that we're sharing information and environmental communication that we want the community to see. For a nonprofit like us, when I started in this role as a marketing manager, it was just me out there trying to spread the good word about, you know, important things to know if there's like a heat advisory, or you know, if shoveling sidewalks and like the importance of that, or some of the programs we have around trees. We had very limited capacity for our communication. And so this tool has really transformed our ability to kind of change the narrative as we want to do. So there are challenges, I think, in implementing these screens, as John and Maddie can attest to. It takes a lot of work to get real estate inside of some of these high traffic places and really make sure that the communication that we're doing is easy to understand for folks who, some of whom, you know, might not have a cell phone or might not have an email address, and so are pretty inaccessible. If those challenges, I think we've been able to overcome, and so we've built kind of a good pilot network. And I think in the future, we really imagine like having a screen in pretty much every community space or any place people gather, so that the community feels ownership of them and they're putting stuff on this dashboard network by themselves, but also so that when we have like these really important, oh shoot.
Well, I'll say something while Neeraj gets back in, which is these may, at the face of it, seem like they're slightly disparate projects, but our goal is really to bring these things together. There's a lot of basic science literacy issues, particularly around issues like air quality, where people within the city of Cleveland are frankly disproportionately impacted by negative air quality because of source emitters like proximity to highways and proximity to stationary sources like factories and that sort of thing. So there's real issues of environmental injustice that at some level are really also issues of scientific literacy. And the same could be said of water-related issues as well. So we really do see what, again, might seem on the face of it, well, how does a science center have to do with like a community dashboard? Our goal is to really bring those together, and every story that we developed for the Cleveland Environmental Dashboard is also accessible within the Midtown. And so beginning to think about how do we do economic development, social development, and environmental development, and really bridge this gap. You know, obviously the people going to Great Lakes Science Center are people who are already interested in science at some level. They've already got a little of that. We want to expand their interest in it. How do we take people who that's not where they're coming from at all and give them a little bit of content that lets them better understand, you know, how air quality is affecting my health? What could I do to engage in the community in terms of improving air quality? What can I do for my family to address situations when air quality or water quality? Anyways, Neeraj is back, so we'll turn things back over.
Yeah, sorry about that. I pretty much was wrapping up my little speech,
Okay.
but yeah, I think we are looking to install community dashboards really in as many places as we can. I think in like the bus stations along the like Euclid avenue would be kind of the biggest dream personally for me. But I think like really thinking about going to where people are and setting the table so that the communication that we're doing is really easy to understand and holistically is touching on all of the priorities not only Midtown has, but like our kind of civic community has for messaging 24/7 through this new channel of communication. So
Thanks, Neeraj. Maddie,
Hello, everyone. So I mean, I don't know how much to say just because I was a student. I was in that classroom not too long ago, and I started working on the dashboard. And it's nice hearing both sides to what we do because I work in Cleveland at the Great Lakes Science Center with science, but I also work in Midtown that's more focused on like community building. And honestly, what I would have to say is I've had presenters come in that class and speak about the work that they do. And now I have the privilege to work alongside these collaborators and mostly on storytelling and graphic design, but it just feels like a real privilege to be around the partners that the environmental dashboard has and the community dashboard has. So yes.
I think what I want to do is open things up to questions from folks. So you guys posed some neat questions online, and I want to, if the floor is open for questions about Cleveland Dashboard, but also about, you know, the careers and that sort of stuff. It's all open. Yeah, Sammy.
This is for Maddie. As we're coming up on some opportunities for feedback on the stories and graphics from like alum and trustees, is there anything in specific that you wanted feedback on?
I mean, as much as we can get. I think that my biggest question in terms of feedback is each slide communicating something independently? And another feedback, or I think also just questions about, if we're talking about user testing, questions around how long are people actually standing in front of the screen and looking at these stories? Because if we have a duration of time where people are looking at the screen, we can much more efficiently design the slides to communicate a very brief story within that duration. So I think it's more like, it's not necessarily story feedback, although I would love feedback on design and communication, but also just like the technicalities of really how long are people looking at the screen? How are they engaging with the content? What buttons are they pressing? Are they scanning the QR code? Those are the big questions for me. So
Great, thanks.
Neeraj, I've got two questions that I can think of here. One, you were talking about the locations of the environmental dashboard in Midtown. And I was just wondering, are there any areas that you guys are trying to prioritize in terms of new locations to put in there? And why are those, if there are, why are those locations ones that have a very particular impact in the Midtown community?
yeah, great question. So when we started, I think we were looking for places that were high traffic where community resource events and generally just like events, but and like job opportunities, they're going to reach the people who need them and who like want them. So we started at Dave's Market, which is like not just a grocery store, but it really functions as a third space, an informal meeting place for community members. I think we tried to put screens in you know, like offices or in like more corporate settings. And I think it was challenging because it's harder to get companies to pay for it sometimes, but I think things just kind of align strategically for us to focus on places where community members are who want to see this information, and then like help finding like funders who could help us get the screens into these places that might not be able to afford them on their own. So for the second and the third screens we did at Fatima Family Center and in Wilson Tower, which is a CMHA property, it's, you know, I think the cell was very much like they could see the value in having this information in front of their residents and community members, but they don't have the financial capacity to pay for it. So we thought about how to make that ask easier for them prior to opening up the conversation. I think in the next few months, we are thinking about one, how to like show that we really over delivered on what we set out to do. We said we were going to do one screen and we were able to do two, maybe three. So hopefully that will help us get more funding that can help us kind of continue to prioritize like places that I've described that are hard to pay for, but would be great to be at. And I think the place where we're really focused on now is Asiatown, where we have a ton of community members who really have just not had much exposure to community resources for many years. And there are two like kind of plazas where I think it would be possible to install a screen. And so we're just kind of trying to navigate how to do that. And then I think Maddie touched on this a little bit, but like the storytelling, like and like how the technology reflects the community that it's in, that to me is the differentiating thing about this, like what Community Hub does, because a jobs board and a calendar, it makes sense on its face, but it's really like how that valuable information is interwoven with the faces and quotes from people who, you know, are looking at the screen and living there, that I think really make it such a unique and valuable project. So when we do this in Asiatown, whether through like making sure stuff is translated or just making sure that we're going out and like doing a lot of the interviews and storytelling for community members in Asiatown, we'll have to just make sure that we're doing it in the right way and just aligning things correctly. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. And then oh yeah, please. I do have another one, but we'll let some other people go.
Hi, I kind of have a question for everyone about like the merging of the Great Lakes Science Center and that the like real-time like air quality and water quality data into the like Midtown community dashboard. And like particularly I feel like the like Great Lakes Center like has a lot of like really good information explaining like air quality and water quality and like where it's coming from and what are like contributors of that, but it doesn't really like draw these connections to environmental injustice that the community of Midtown is facing as this like intersection between Black and Asian communities. And I'm wondering how like the Great Lakes Science Center can make that connection while providing that information to the public and hopefully like create some sort of like community action and like transformation rather than resilience and adaptation mitigation.
I can certainly start that answer. I would say one of the key things in science communication is that you avoid the assumption that you know how to explain something to someone about their own community. And so when we're working with a particular community, the first step and an example of that is right across from Dave's Market there when you look at the exhibits and things we created at the new Magnet headquarters. all of the, research and work leading into that was not us sitting around talking about the best way to do things. It was being in community events and talking to people who lived in the area, getting data, and then taking, prototype concepts to the public at community events and saying, try this out, let us know what you think of this, and getting feedback on things. So that has to be the core of it. There's so often a very deep knowledge in the community itself that has to be reflected in your project, that is the critical starting, beginning, and it's the beginning, middle, and end of the conversation is making sure that it is very much driven by the people you're serving.
Yeah, I would just add on my end like that we want to demonstrate like the viability of the network and like having screens everywhere. And I think we're getting to that point now, but I'm also like, once we do that, I feel like then we'll really have an opportunity to expand and think more broadly about how we are conveying that live information through like this now mature channel. So I am really excited about what we might be able to do as far as conveying that information.
I'll just throw in a set of new partners who are not part of this conversation. Are a consortium of people who formed this organization called Clean and Clee, which is installing particulate metering sensors. You guys read a little bit about that, I think, as part of this, particulate sensors across neighborhoods in Cleveland. And I think they're doing a lot of the work that Kirsten is describing, in the sense that from the beginning, they engaged community members. They actually hired local folks within communities, air ambassadors who are communicating with, who are of the communities. They're people who live in these communities who are helping to prioritize where the sensors get installed in communities and are helping to sort of facilitate that discussion. So I think when I look at our potential for doing this, it's very much piggybacking on top of a program that was designed exactly as Kirsten is designed, with the notion of, if you're going to, you've got this combination of sort of high-tech data acquisition technology and, the best, scientists at Case Western reserving on how do we best gather this technology? How do we make sure we're gathering quality data on air quality? But pairing that with people within communities making choices about where should these things be installed, and having discussions, a series of neighborhood discussions. So I see our project very much like we did with Midtown, piggybacking on top of their work. We're not of Midtown. The goal that we had with Midtown is really try to learn from Midtown about what they've learned from the community, what the community is receptive to, and simply use our technology as a conduit, an additional conduit for getting that information to more people, where it's not about us imposing, it's about learning from the community and then sharing and making creating a venue which allows for broader sharing of that information. So it is not a top-down information approach, it's a bottom-up. Again, I think figuring out the nugget between science education and community development, which, obviously is the difference between Great Lakes Science Center and Midtown, figuring out how all that stuff works together in synergy is both the challenge and the opportunity. Kirsten, I don't know if you have any more to say about that, but that's how I see it fitting,
No, I certainly agree with that, and it gets you out of the really pedantic history we have in science communication. It's a hard habit to break, and it's really critical that we get out of that habit.
And that's really one of our main goals with Community Voices, is finding people who are engaged at the street level, who are either as individuals or as part of, local organizations, working to try to create both social and environmental solutions to challenges, but science-based solutions, you know, everything based on an understanding of the natural world, but how that plays out within particular communities and for different members of different communities. I think trying to get all that together is the challenge and the opportunity. Yeah. Well, we have taken all the time we booked for you. I don't know if any of you have any parting comments you'd like to share with our students here. They've certainly gained a lot from this. Anyone have any last, I mean, I want to make sure we're not taking more of your time, more of your valuable time than we asked for. Any final comments from our guests?
No, I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Well, we really, really appreciate all of you taking time out of your busy day to share with us. So thank you so much. Thanks. We'll be seeing all of you in the near future. So take care, everyone. Thanks again.
Thanks so much.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
I think I'll leave us on for a minute because there are a number of people who are sick today, and I want to give us a chance to do what we've done before. Take a moment to kind of just reflect on anything that was shared in this discussion that you think is particularly valuable. Again, try to come up with a terse little statement, 1 or 2 sentences, so we can quickly go around the room, and I want to give people an opportunity to share any insights. So just take a moment to think about what was said and something that you found valuable. Could be to you, could be in terms of our projects. Right, ideally, we start with someone who we haven't started with before. Is there anyone who we haven't started with before who wants to start? All right, now.
I like what Kirsten was saying about avoiding the assumption that you know how to explain something to a particular community and emphasizing like how they really wanted to get in, like being in community events and talking to people who live there about these issues.
That's great.
I think something that Niraj said that is probably gonna stick with me is, so he really emphasized like a lot of his work is about like changing the narrative about Midtown, and like I just think it kind of fits in with like how we're working on stories, like not just like content for the screens, but stories, since so much of how we like process information is like in narrative. So I just thought that was worthwhile.
I thought it was interesting how with children, when we teach them about how to collect data and to prioritize environmental science, they're grow up having that still in their mind, and they're more likely to pursue a career in STEM. So I think the environmental dashboard can help with the dashboard in elementary schools, having that presence around, and students are surrounded by that. They kind of have like that subconscious mindset of paying attention to STEM and environmental issues.
I thought it was interesting how the science center, they're not just internal stuff, but like also the data. So like there's really to get kids more invested in like science, computer science, like hackathons and stuff.
I was also interested about what Jasmine was saying, and it made me think about in the reading, in one of like the grants we were looking at, it was talking about the dashboard system in Toledo schools and how like teachers are going to be educated on how to use that dashboard system in their curriculum. So yeah, I've just been thinking about how like significant it is to like put these ideas in kids' heads at such a young age.
I was gonna say something along the lines of what Sadie said about how just making like the data more publicly available at events that don't even really have to do with like learning about sustainability, but just making it more like public knowledge can be helpful in promoting environmental stewardship, like with the hackathons.
I was interested in the point about like building the sense of like community ownership of the boards and like working like directly with community members to create like messaging for like both dashboards and just like the fact that like the core of it is community based.
So as someone who's interested in informal education, social justice, and environmental conservation, I found it interesting how Kirsten kept referring to this field of study called informal science education. I never actually heard of it as like a field. She mentioned multiple textbooks. She also mentioned some like fellowships that we like supportive of people going through that type of field. And I found that it's particularly striking as like a whole realm of opportunities that don't exist. So I wanted to say something a little bit different than all you guys. So
That's good.
Is that informal science education?
Yeah.
Almost science education.
And kind of building off of that, I was really interested in what most people were discussing in terms of changing narratives or trying to purposefully introduce ideas that made people reconsider the narratives that they might hold, especially with both community-based organizations and how non-community-based organizations can best insert themselves into the work of a community. Because I believe that the narrative that we have about what it is that we ourselves are doing has a really strong impact on what we look for, how we reevaluate what it is we're doing, and how we figure out how there's room to grow.
Neat. I'll share a couple thoughts. One is that one of my goals when we have folks come in is really, among other things, I mean, obviously I want you to learn about the people we're collaborating with, but I also want you to envision your own careers in the future and like the pathways that people got, how the pathways that people got where they got. And I do feel like Kirsten had some really good suggestions for you folks to think about in terms of, you know, ways to, you know, among other things, beef up your resume, but also beef up your knowledge. And I thought her suggestion that you get on boards is actually a really good one. And maybe to get more specific about that, it's not that hard to get on local nonprofit boards or on city commissions. You know, there's, you know, an open space commission in Oberlin, for instance, and people get appointed to the open space commission. You know, there's, you know, all sorts of nonprofits in Oberlin that would probably be happy to have students on their boards. You know, people value student opinion. You know, any sort of position you have to be an observer, you know, I mean, within environmental studies, it's not exactly a board, but we have 2 student representatives who sit in on, who are, you know, representatives of the environmental studies majors, Anya and Evan, who sit in on our meetings. And not only are they contributing to the meeting, they're learning an enormous amount about the way organization like the environmental studies program works, how decision-making works within that, how financing works within that. You know, it's just really valuable to sort of seek out and try to get yourselves into these positions. And it's not that hard. You do need to get over the hurdle, but of, you know, making the initiative. But, you know, every nonprofit within Oberlin has a board. You know, my wife's on the board of the she's 2 boards. She's on the board of the school endowment fund. So that's an endowment where teachers and students can apply for funds, and they have an endowed fund. And so, you know, she serves on that board. She serves on the board of the Mad Factory, which is our local music, arts, drama nonprofit in this area, which does amazing stuff. You know, we've had student reps on the Power Board, providing Oberlin with energy responsibly, that does a lot of efficiency work in, especially in low-income houses. There's tons of boards around here that you can participate in, and it really is a great experience to do those things. Really, you get such insight into the way the world works and nonprofits work through those experiences. That was something I just wanted to stress. But like one thing I was thinking about when Kirsten in particular was talking was like our niche, like the niche of environmental dashboard within science communication, within Cleveland, and her sort of very clearly segmenting what different museums and science education entities have to offer, what the zoo does, what I mean, actually, I'll be honest, there was a little bit of tension initially with our initial exhibit at the Great Lakes Science Center, because we wanted this mural which had, you know, the fish and squirrel characters very prominently on that mural. And she actually stopped us midway through. We got, I think, the fish on there, but we never did get the squirrel on there. I mean, we designed the whole thing. It wasn't our fault. We designed it. It had been approved by our primary contact there, Scott Fulmer, who just left the organization a week ago, but it had all been approved. So we weren't doing anything that we hadn't run by, but he evidently hadn't run it by her. And she's like, we don't do animals here. That's Natural Science Museum. We don't have animals in any of our exhibits because we're walking on their toes. We have an agreement with them. We don't do animals here. I think she's since gotten a little bit more flexible on that, but that notion of niche separation, and her notion in particular that she sees our job there as being principally about environmental data and helping people understand how to interpret environmental data. It's good for me to rehear that's where she's coming from with our exhibit, that's her priority. It's a niche I'm very happy to be in, but just to rehear her saying, like, from our perspective as an institution, that's where we see you having value. You always, when you work with, you know, we're a partner with them, you always want to understand what value they're getting out of it, because obviously you want them to feel like they're getting their value out of it. So even if we have some other priorities in terms of what we're trying to do there, we have to make sure, bottom line, that we're achieving their priorities. And you know, again, it's not a challenge for us. We're excited about using data to communicate, having kids explore data. All of the data stuff is very exciting to us, but it's not the only thing we do. But for them, it's a priority, so we want to frame what we're doing in that context as letting them know that yes, it is a priority for us, and we want to make sure we're achieving your particular goals with our exhibit here, because they've got a whole museum, there's a lot of different things going on in it. We need to fit within their ecosystem. You know, they have an ecosystem. Kirsten is clearly the visionary behind what happens at Great Lakes Science Center. We have to fit within her vision if we want to do what we want to do. And as I've said before, you could say, well, that her vision is not necessarily absolutely our vision. But my experience with most of the people I collaborate with is my vision usually fits pretty well within their vision. And it's just a matter of finding that intersection and articulating, telling the story, if you will, going back to storytelling, telling the story about how what we're doing meets their mission, even if we've got some other things we're trying to do. Like for me, the community voices piece that we do in Great Lakes Science Center, I'm not totally sure how important that is to Kirsten. It's really important to us, you know, as long as she's okay with it, we're good with it. But for me, that sort of democratization side of, I want to bring voices from all over Cleveland into the Great Lakes Science Center, talking about those experiences. So when kids come through, they're seeing on the screen kids like them and adults like them, you know, and they can envision, you know, yeah, this is about me. This isn't just some science thing. A couple comments people wanted to make. Okay, go ahead.
I was just curious, I've definitely experienced that, the importance of understanding an organization's mission
Right,
before you try to do something new within the organization.
right.
I'm just wondering, with the different niches that she's talking about, like making a more defined boundary between what the Science Center does, what the Natural History Museum does, what the Cleveland Zoo does, is, I guess, two questions. One, do you know of any ways that those different organizations partner together to draw on their individual strengths and build something together? Like, do they ever work on initiatives or events together? And then would they, and I guess, how exactly is carving out a particular niche in the context of Great Lakes Science Center, how does that benefit what they're trying to do?
I don't know the ins and outs of all the contexts in which the different, in which the zoo, the Metro Park Zoo and Great Lakes Science Center and Natural History Museum, engage. I know that they're in informal dialogue about things regularly and that they do try to niche separate. The reason for niche separating is so that there's a reason to go to all of them and they're not competing, especially not competing for grant dollars. I mean, it's a finite pool of people with money out there who want to give, and you want to, there's a little competition. I mean, the Great Lakes Science Center just did an exhibit on dinosaurs, which is a total no-no in terms of stepping on other people's toes, because that's so natural history museum. So there is some competition among them, but it makes sense for them to try to, do niche separation. I would say part of, how many of you have been to Great Lakes Science Center? None of you have been to Great Lakes Science Center. I'd say Great Lakes Science, how many of you have been to the San Francisco Exploratorium? You've been to the San Francisco, the Exploratorium really innovated on the idea of deep experiential learning, people being able to play with things and learn things by creating and doing. And I would say Great Lakes Science Center kind of was one of many science museums across the country that tried to learn from the Exploratorium and create more sort of hands-on, kids are doing things. And when I say kids, Great Lakes Science Center definitely skews to kids. It's like, I'd say the median age there is probably 10. And really there are not a lot of later teenagers there. And the only adults there are more or less parents. That's basically what they got at Great Lakes. There's a children's museum, which gets a younger set than that, but they get the kids who are excited about science. I think we also get their parents in an important way, but that's partly the nature of the stories we created, is we wanted to make sure they work for like fourth graders to, maybe 6th, 7th graders in terms of their target audience of who would most resonate with them. Yeah.
Okay. You're talking about getting on the board, but to be honest, I don't know what it means to be on a board.
Oh, thank you, thank you.
Get on that.
Thank you, that's good. So a nonprofit organization has a board of directors. Oberlin College has a board of directors, and they make a lot of the decisions, especially about how money is spent at Oberlin. The primary, usually the way a nonprofit is structured is there's kind of executives who basically run things, a little more complicated at Oberlin College, because there's executives like the president here and chief finance officer, people in facilities, who basically are sort of like at some level running the big picture show. And then in Oberlin College, there are the academic deans who are involved in helping to run the product we deliver, which is education here. Us faculty supposedly have a role in governance, although they've been undermining that in the past few years. But the board makes big picture decisions. The board basically, they hire the president. The president serves at the pleasure of the board. If the board gets upset about how the president is running the organization, they will replace the president. So the board serves at the pleasure, the president serves at the pleasure of the board. Boards of nonprofits are almost all volunteers. They don't get paid. So students may complain about Oberlin College's board of directors and say, I think they're too conservative. They're pushing Oberlin College in the wrong way. And you could make all these criticisms, and generally you try to put some people on an organization like Oberlin. you try to get people who have money on your board, because partly what they're doing is helping you bring in money because you need money to run the operation. So a lot of the people on our board are people who are affluent and are business people. Not everyone, there are a lot of people in a lot of different areas. But their job is basically to do the 40,000-foot evaluation. Is this organization accomplishing its mission? And what do we need to do to change things? Like the whole SIP project we did here, like I say, for years, those of us who were involved in environmental initiatives at Oberlin suggested ideas. We got resources to bring in people to do studies of what we could do. It wasn't until the board was involved that we actually made any progress. And that is because, as I mentioned, when we had our guests from Evergreen here, because the board holds the purse strings and you can come up with great plans within an organization, but if you don't have someone with the ability to execute on those plans, saying this is a budget priority, it just isn't going to happen. Nothing is going to happen. So the board plays this key role in deciding how money is going to be spent, how money is going to be raised within an organization. So it's true at smaller nonprofits too. I mean, they decide priorities. Like usually there's an executive some sort who's like in charge of day-to-day operations, or maybe several executives. But the board is like setting the priorities for the organization. So it doesn't meet necessarily that regularly. You know, the board for Oberlin College meets, I think, you know, there's subcommittees and stuff, but I think they officially meet maybe 4 times a year. But they're making the big picture decisions about how the institution will run and who's going to be running the institution. And that's true at these smaller boards. So like the Mad Factory board that my wife is on, it's sort of, you know, really making decisions about who do we hire as people to actually run the organization, and really in that organization, how do we support these people who are running this organization? How do we help bring in additional funds so that they can keep doing the good work that they're doing? Does that help explain?
Yeah, and you just get on by like, they like invite you.
You contact them and you say, hey, I'm really interested in participating, you know, love to be a board member, you know, or I'd love to learn more about the board and how the board operates. You know, you just talk to people who are involved in the organization. If you find an organization in Oberlin that you're interested in, I mean, my son actually serves, who's in the 12th grade at Oberlin High. He serves on the endowment board for the schools. So he's a voting member of that board. He's one of 2 student reps who serves on that board to help them so they review proposals from teachers and students. Obviously, he can't review anything that his friends, I mean, you know, there's conflicts of interest that you try to avoid these situations. But he, along with the adults on that board, review you know, the proposals and decide which ones deserve funding, which ones should we support.
So while we're on the topic of boards, I understand like most nonprofits have that board structure where it's the board and the executives and the rest of the organization,
Yeah.
and then the actual like what happens. Right. I'm curious, are there other nonprofit like structural power dynamic frameworks?
Other models of how it operates?
That you know of?
I don't know. Most nonprofits, I don't know of any nonprofits that don't function with a board model. And in fact, most for-profit corporations, larger corporations, I mean, you could have a small business that's run by a family or something like that, where there's just sort of an individual making decisions. But most larger companies, they also have boards. The boards usually are composed of people who are significant stockholders in the company. But those boards, you know, set priorities and decide, you know, what products do we think we should launch? So, you know, General Motors has a board, any big company has a board too. So that board structure is just typical of most organizations, that you have this board that hires and fires the executives who run the organization. Now, getting on a board of a corporation is a whole different thing, because usually that occurs because you're a big investor. So you have a big financial stake in there, whereas nonprofits, you get paid nothing, and you know, you're more or less a volunteer.
I know this is kind of getting off topic. What about like union-owned like companies? Would like the union workers be able to be on the board, or? Unique scenario. I can look at the
Yeah, I think, you know, unions elect their leadership. So it's a little bit more like a government, I think, in that sense, that the members of the union elect their leadership, and their leadership then appoints executives. So it's a little different in that way, and that it's a union, I think, is at least in principle more democratic, whether in practice it is or not. But anyways, that is getting pretty far astray. Tell you what, I want to talk about community voices. I figured today was a good place to insert that discussion in. Why don't we do like a 3-minute break, since you guys have been sitting for a while, and then let's reassemble, and I want to talk a little bit about community voices. And for those of you who are still here, I'm gonna ask that you navigate to the Community Voices Assignment F24, which is linked under the Assignments tab. And then you can help others when they return navigate there, just so we can sort of start from that place. Because what I want to do is kind of some hands-on work with.
Where is this?
If you go to the assignment drop for our class, so go to assignment drop. So from schedule,
Okay,
you go to assignment drop. And then from assignment drop, click on Community Voices Interview Assignment, and then you'll be where you want to be. So Sadie, welcome to the Environmental Studies major.
Well, I have to submit the form.
Oh, you haven't submitted the form yet. Okay, you're not official.
I know. Also, even after I submit the form, it still takes 15 business days for it to process, so it's probably not for another 2 weeks or so. But I'll do it today, so today.
If we need a lab course,
Geo.
let's take the Geo 120. It's all good. Have people found themselves to let's see, I've probably have it open several times now to this document. I'm keeping Zoom on just because there are several people who are sick today. It seems like a lot of people are sick on campus today. I have like 4 students in my earlier class today emailed me yesterday saying, I'm gonna be too sick to show up tomorrow. So they were anticipating being sick. Have you guys all gotten your COVID shot? Oh, this is a good time, Luke, for you to do your announcement.
okay. Hi, everyone. I am speaking to you on behalf of Oberlin College Democrats, and I'm proud to announce that today is National Voter Registration Day. So, show of hands, who here is registered to vote?
Oh, Jesus.
Oh, no problem. So tell all your friends who aren't registered, or if they have any questions about registering, Science Center and Wilder 312. You can go to Science Library and Wilder 312. You can go to either of those places, and they have all the forms there. You just need to know the last 4 digits of your social security number. And they have all the forms registered here in Ohio specifically. Are you planning on registering in Ohio?
Yeah.
Perfect. They'll have that for there. And we're getting the momentum going, so try and get every single person on this campus who is able getting registered to vote. So ask all your friends, this is the day to do it. Not the only day, but it's the day where there's a national holiday for it, technically speaking. So thank you very much. Yes,
Is there like a certain, like, are there certain hours where we can go?
Wilder 312 should be open for basically all of today specifically because it's National Voter
Into the
Registration Day.
evening?
Yes. And the science library is open for however long the science library is. But they also have other days after today where they'll be open and have those forums. So I think it's the OC Votes office if you search online for that. So OC Votes. And they should have office hours listed if you find the right page for that. Here, let me see if I can't.
It's okay, I think I'll try to go sometime today. Thank you.
That's great. All right, thank you. So I want to talk a little bit for the remainder of our class. I want to actually, I'll very quickly say a few things about community voices. And then I want us to do a little bit of practice with community voices. So hopefully everyone has given the guide to community voices a careful read in preparation for today, and has also here, let me switch to presentation mode, and has also paid particular attention to the principles of effective communication, that set of communication principles which we're trying to accomplish with community voices. So you guys have obviously seen community voices content. It plays out differently in our different implementations. I'll show you a couple slides just to remind you of community voices content from Oberlin implementation in particular, where we have these 6 different content categories. In Midtown, we have a slightly different set of content categories. In Great Lakes Science Center, where we actually have quite a bit of overlap with Midtown, we have a different set of content categories that are more focused on their particular stories. So actually, I think I've been through these, I've shown these particular slides before, haven't I? Is that true or is that not true? Well, what we're going to do is I'm going to actually encourage you to open up the guide to community voices that was assigned for today and take a quick peek at the core communications principles in particular.
So this is the user guide.
Yeah, this is the user guide to developing content for community voices, the guide for developing content for community voices. Because these are the 8 core communication principles that we're really striving for. And it's not usually possible to achieve all of these in a particular slide, but this is what we're shooting for: telling stories that are personal and local, celebrating positive thought and action, featuring diversity, leveraging social norms, and satisfying people's desire to belong. Again, going back to Cindy Francis' talk, featuring the commitments and goals of interviewees, emphasizing consistency in thought and action. So you're seeing a lot of Cialdini in there, appealing to self-interest and convenience, as well as to community. And then, thinking hard about how the images reinforce and support the text to engage, educate, motivate, and empower. So that's kind of the goal of what we're going to do for the remainder of class today. Is a couple of exercises to help you think about achieving these goals. Let's see. Let's go ahead and make little breakout groups of our project groups. So I realize several of you are, who's missing their project partner today? Okay, so you guys can be together as a group. And was there someone else other than Nev who's missing a group? Well, then you can join these guys. You'll be a group of 3, but otherwise get together with your project groups. And we're going to, I'm just giving you some examples here of things that are that emphasize, so I'm gonna show you, so just sit with them. Sit with your partner group, and I'm just giving you some examples of slides that accomplish some of these goals. So this idea of telling stories that are personal and local, emphasizing actions that people can take within within the community, featuring local environmental impacts, positive as well as negative, emphasizing local ecology, economy. So this is just how these play out. This is what it means to tell a story that is local and personal, connecting local and global. So again, it's kind of an example of that. When we think about celebrating positive thought and action, emphasizing solutions rather than problems. And again, a lot of this has to do with the particular media. Some people I've had community members, for instance, criticize some of the content we put on screens and say, why don't you talk about everything that's wrong? Why are you talking about the things that are right? There's a lot of things that are wrong in our community. And part of my take on that is we've got a media which is screens that people can choose to look at or not look at. My assumption has always been people are more likely to look at a screen if it's got a positive message on it than if it has a negative message on it. And there's a way of framing negative situations as in terms of people taking positive action to address a negative situation that turns what is a negative situation into a positive. So, that's part of the basis of why we focus on celebrating positive thought and action. So emphasizing solutions, appealing to people's desire to be good, featuring images of people being happy, proud, engaged, pro-environmental. All of that is, again, the slide's sort of an example of accomplishing that. Featuring diversity, again, a lot of this is about social norms. We want to create content that represents and resonates with the entire swath of the very diverse group of people who live in every community we work in. So just making sure that people see faces like them and people who they identify with in any number of different ways, who may have different values. They may be driven by different things. We've done whole sections of community voices content in the past, for instance, that is based on spiritual and religious motivation. So we've interviewed people in many different churches in Oberlin, pastors of many churches, to get their view on why people should take positive action. And I don't happen to be a particularly religious person myself, but my goal is to participate in a project that creates content that resonates with people who are deeply motivated by religion. So recognizing that, my motivation is not necessarily other people's motivation, and valuing other people's motivation and making sure we're featuring their particular motivation from their particular perspective. Again, it's been important to this project since the beginning to feature people who are not normally heard from, who are not necessarily traditional leaders. So that's a thing. Another example, including kids has obviously been a very important piece of that. Children are represented on it. Leveraging social norms norms and desires to belong. So statements like bicycles have always been a favorite way of getting around Oberlin. It's a normative statement. It's just communicating that to people, and obviously the photograph here is supportive not only of bicycles. And where did that sign go is what I want to know. Caution, 4,000 bikes in Oberlin, because it's a great sign. That sign should still be up.
Well, it got outdated. There's
What's that?
6,000.
Yeah, right. So, but notice that it's got like almost a co-branding. So you've got this sign that says home of the first co-educational college. So it's got that sort of, it's got a couple layers to it, that photograph of being pro bikes, but also communicating things about gender equality and issues like that. Anyway, I'm showing you a few examples because what I'm gonna do next is show you some slides and ask you to think about, hey, which of these particular core communication principles are these slides illustrating? So that's where I'm heading. Leveraging social norms and desire to belong, demonstrating that other community members are exhibiting the target behavior, making people feel like they're part of something larger, highlighting groups of people highlighting groups that people associate themselves with. So again, an example of both a college professor and local minister in Oberlin, A.G. Miller, well-respected member of the community, talking about his congregation and what they do and how they're engaged in the City Fresh program. Obviously, authority figure here, authority figure that's part of a number of different groups, authority figure that's a member of a minority community, talking about what people he connects with, people who are part of his community do, and communicating that as a social norm. Here's Cindy's favorite slide, featuring commitments and goals. What are people doing? What do people say that they do to make themselves, the family, and the ecology more sustainable? Featuring organizations and community level goals, and explaining the rationale for commitments. This one doesn't really explain the rationale, but it does a little bit of that. I walk to live. It's part of her fundamental being. Someone making a statement about, what we as a community do. We're not going to depend on forces outside of Oberlin. We're going to see what we can do inside of Oberlin to create something sustainable, that pride and sense of identity and belonging to this particular community. Consistency, I want to do my part to stop climate change. Statement about what they want to do. I ride my bike to work every day, so it's that direct. I'm trying to do a thing, here's what I do that's consistent with this value that I have. So that consistency between values, worldviews, and actions, showing that within the slides. And again, there's no quote that's ever going to accomplish all of these goals, but just making sure as you think about quotes, which ones are going to accomplish this? Which one are going to accomplish this goal? And again, appealing to self-interest is not bad. I love gardening because I don't have to go to the stores. You just pick it and eat it. I like eating it. It's good for me. It's got a lot of community in it as well. But it's a statement that has a little bit of self-interest in it as well. So it's all good. Yeah. All right. I want to go ahead and dive into exercise number 1 here. So I had you guys open up the there's so many windows open. Let me see if I got the right one. Yes, this is what I want. So you guys should have, does everyone have this document open? All right, let's click on exercise 1, which is linked in this document. And I want you to, within your group, collaborate with your fellow group members to identify which of the core communication principles the slide is featuring. And why don't we do this, because we're only going to spend about 5 minutes on this. Why doesn't this group focus on slides 1 and 2 to start with? This group focus on slides 3 and 4, and this group focus on 5 and 6. And then just keep on going through slides, but just so we start at different points in it. Again, your job is to jot notes down below each one of these about which core communication principle you think this particular slide is illustrating. And I'm not going to give you that long on it. So again, you guys are starting on 1 and 2. You guys are starting on 3 and 4, 5 and 6. 7 and 8, and then just cycle back if you get done with the first one. So try to get through at least 2 or 3 slides if you can. And it doesn't need to be perfect, just talk about and jot down what you think, which of the core communication principles you think each of these is accomplishing.
I definitely was.
Because they're the first 2.
Yeah, maybe one of you opens up the core communication principles and the other looks at it. Maybe that's a good way to do it.
Yeah, I'll open up. Oh,
Yeah.
okay, well, I'll go over here.
I think
Okay, cool.
social norms.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it's okay.
Also,
I believe because it's a statement of saying that it's not like I think.
grounded in this, so when the thought of place to live, it's kind of like, it's also leveraging, like saying like, oh, this is supposed to be our norm. Sunsets feature the community and goals of the town.
This for folks who are not here. Lost that darn document. My so many documents that are open. I'll be able to find it. There we go. All right, I'm trying to. Okay. All right, so you want to say a little bit about what you think this one is doing and how it's doing it?
Yeah, I can say, yeah, we said telling stories that are personal and local. Yeah, it's like, we can all read the quote, I love gardening because it's a great way to see life and how it grows. And clearly all of these kids are very excited about that through this picture. We also said featuring diversity between people and also like age groups. They're all like, obviously it's good to showcase people of older age and younger age and see how they interact within the community, and also celebrating positive thought and action, and yeah, getting the message out that about gardening and that these kids like it.
Good. I mean, these things are not necessarily that complicated. It's all, does anyone have anything else that they think this is really doing in terms of core communication principles? All right. Let's take a look at this one.
So we had a lot to say about this one, and the first two are core communication principles are celebrating positive thoughts and action. It feels good to be part of a community and feel like you're benefiting that community. So we think that this slide tries to make people think about the wider Oberlin area, not in terms of just the human community, but how our community also has non-human animals and plants and a lot of other beings in it. And then we had featuring diversity as another one by having diversity in who's depicted in the image, as well as making sure that fifth grade voices, which might not be always considered to be traditional leaders, are emphasized. Do you want to take the other two?
Yeah, so we thought that appeal to self-interest and be interested in type it in, but that's what the third bullet point is. We decided to put that because, you know, a lot of these slides are like, you know, are calls to action, but this is more of like a calls to not do harm, which is like, you know, an example of like passive environmental justice, and we thought that appealed to convenience. And then we also decided the last one applied select images that engage, educate, motivate, and empower, just because, you know, they look really cute.
Yeah, and I will say on the diversity front, you've also got species diversity in here too. It's not just a lawn, it's, you know, it's flowers, they look like they're wildflowers. Okay. Thoughts on this one?
This one is like obviously like featuring diversity. It talks about it in it also. Sorry, we didn't really finish this one.
That's fine, that's fine. It
but-
clearly does have this strong, you know, celebration of
Yeah.
diversity here.
Celebrating positive thought and action, just like positivity of diversity, and then also personal and local stories.
Yeah, and there's sort of the one important thing to think about with quotes is the attribution and who things are being attributed to, because oftentimes the organization or who the person is representing is a piece of what's being communicated. So to have someone who's the chair of city council saying this is a certain, you know, it's an authority figure within the community, you know, stating that this is just, you know, this is true about our community, which is a little different from someone else stating that. So I'm just saying the attribution of the person being quoted is oftentimes an important piece of the overall picture. So just worth noting that. All right. We could go on, but I actually want us to take a moment to shift to the next piece of this exercise to wrap with. So what I want you to do is to now open exercise 2, which is bringing us a little bit closer to the process of actually developing content. So usually the way this works is we develop a set of questions for the particular audience we're interviewing. You know, we have a group in this class that's going to focus on volunteers in the community and the people who supervise and benefit from those volunteers. So obviously questions on that would focus on that. What I'm giving you here are a couple of snippets of content that was developed through interviews, some of these done quite a long time ago. And what I want you to do is to highlight in these things quotes that you think are accomplishing key quotes that you think would be good for maybe a little bit of additional editing, but would ultimately be good for putting on signs and the communication principles that they're sharing. So because we're running down on time, let's have this group start on 1, that group start on 2, that group start on 3, and that group start on 4. And your goal is to underline sections that you think could be turned into quotes and jot down, so you can underline them, and then when you do that on the side there, under a comment, you can put down what core communication principles you think that quote you've highlighted think could be used to illustrate. And if you feel like you're running out with your particular one, you can move on to a different one, but make sense what we're doing here? 1, 2, 3, just start on 3, 4.
Yeah, it's like being an Ohio native, an educator, a minority
Yeah,
educator.
totally. I'm just reading the entire thing.
It's good. Sorry, I'm a slow reader. I didn't read yet.
That's too long.
So, yeah, bye.
Can we just do like
You're allowed to splice. We consider this, we splice, we edit, and then we return the quotes to the person who we quoted and ask for their approval before a final one goes out. So we do edit to make it terse. And oftentimes we do quite a bit of editing, but obviously we want to keep the voice of the person to the greatest extent possible. And obviously we want to keep their sentiment, but editing down is something we do all the time. But then again, we share it back so that they can approve it before it goes live. You picked up everything I just said the whole time. Because you do a lot of editing, because making it as short as you possibly can is more likely to be read.
Yeah, I'm noticing a lot of people that came to mind
Clarifying
that
that
I
you
was
have
thinking would be
something
good to
about the
interview have already been interviewed.
It's okay, we can interview them
Yeah.
again, but yeah,
I think I do.
it's good to know who has been interviewed. You can certainly look through the archives and search for anyone's name in community
crazy.
voices,
This is
and
not
you'll find any all
No,
content.
something
that
else
they've
is
interviewed
Oh, that
there,
would be
so
great.
It's pretty easy to do, you just get
Do we
online.
have access to that? Is that?
Yeah, totally, you just.
like not keep them, but she was on the board and she was waiting.
Oh, it's on the website.
If you look on community voices, there's a search box, and it actually, if you just click below it, you just click search, don't put anything in search. You can see, there's actually, you can search by all sorts of different categories, and you can search
Yeah, I just like to
images,
go back.
Yeah.
and you
Yeah,
can
yeah.
search quotes.
Oh,
Like,
wow.
lots of
It's a
recreational
very
complex area.
searchable database. Everything gets
I
tagged
don't know. It's like.
with content.
Like.
So that's a thing.
That's, you're right.
You can search for volunteers, for
Like, about to,
instance,
like,
and it
turn
will
this
show you what
place, like, right,
volunteer
like-
contact we have, because that's one of our tags.
You know, if the older.
But you can just search for a name too, if you're thinking of someone in particular, you can just type that name into here, and if they're that.
True, we're gonna think on it, sure.
Cool.
I think it's the diversity one, where we can empower that's pretty easy.
Yeah.
Pull it up.
Yeah, because I was thinking of entering Rosa.
Oh, yeah, Rosie, go ahead.
Yeah.
Rosie.
I just.
But also shake it up. And we actually interviewed a bunch of people at OES this summer, so we did just do a whole pile of OES interviews. So they might not be the best place. I mean, finding the people who didn't interview would be great, but we interviewed.
Wait, OES or OCS?
Overland Community Services.
Okay, yeah.
You're thinking OES.
No, I was thinking of OCS.
Yeah, we did tons of Overland Community Services interviews this summer. Have you been out there recently?
Yeah, I was there yesterday.
So you saw our new dashboard screen up there?
Yes,
In the
yeah,
lobby?
I saw it last week,
Yeah.
like the day after you brought it
Yeah.
there or something.
Today, it's getting a poster that goes next to it, so that was the next thing.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Aw.
All right, we're running down. Anyone have a quote they think is just particularly cool that they want to share and what they think it does before we depart? Anyone found a quote that's like, that's really right on, and it does something? Come on. Yes.
Our list that we came up with was, I definitely make a point to buy things locally when I can. It makes our restaurants and businesses successful. And this is by the owner of Ben Franklin, which we find emphasizing Ben Franklin specifically,
Right.
there's opportunities to leverage. I'm just trying to make sure I'm understanding what you're explaining, leveraging people's commitment to Overland by highlighting basically a fixture in town.
Yeah, she's a very well-respected person. The nice thing about that is she's a local business owner, but she's talking about what she's doing for other businesses as well. So I do think that's very powerful in encouraging people to buy locally. We've actually done a lot of interviews focused specifically on why you should support the local economy. I think it's been very powerful in terms of getting people to recognize that, especially students coming in where I think people come in, it's like, oh, I'll go down to Walmart and buy a bunch of stuff. And it really does make a huge amount of difference to our town to shop in our local businesses. And so we want to make that known, so that people understand that that's like a community thing to do, All right, we're done. It looks like you want to say something.
I'm sorry.
Okay, we're all.
Give me the first one.
I can send a note, I'll send a note out to all my classes. Tell you what, get on your computer, send me like a couple sentence note you want me to send, and I'll forward it to both of my classes. And what's more, I'll forward it to all environmental studies majors. How's that? Yeah. Take care.
Yeah, it's like some.
Oh,
Yeah.
did you just got that tire for yourself? Where did you get it? Did you get it at the bike co-op or did you get it? Oh, okay. It's good to support our local businesses.
You can get there to like pay for it, we have to. So.
And we're gonna. You're saying at the bike co-op? Do you guys have new energy? New cars? That's nice. Take care. No, we sometimes did, sometimes didn't. No, we bought a lot of parts and sold them. We got in trouble for that initially because the college didn't want us competing with the local store. And actually, the local store at the time actually complained. And then what we decided to do, well, we'll give it away, but you can make a donation. And here's the suggested donation. And obviously everyone just gave the suggested donation. So that was the way we got around it, as we say.
That's why I charge my part.
What's that?
Is that why I charge?